Hi everybody, today we are going to talk about how you multiply and divide integers. All right, so let's start off with some positive integers. If we had the problem 3 times 2, both positive integers, we're going to start off with our number line and we're going to pretend like we are somebody standing on the number line. This is their face. I'm going to give them a little hat. And they are going to try and perform, they're going to jump along the number line to perform 3 times 2. Okay? So before we get started, we have to agree that 3 times 2 is basically repeated addition, right? 3 times 2 is basically saying that we are adding the 3 2 times. Multiplication is repeated addition. So when we jump, we're basically going to show the repeated addition with our jumping. So here's our person. They're going to jump 3 2 times. Again, I'm going to give them a hat so that you can see which direction that they're walking in. Okay, they got a tiny little body right here. All right, so they're going to jump starting at 0. That's our starting point. To 3, going to 3, that's one jump, and then another jump of 3, so then that's how they land at 6. So our final answer is 6 because we are adding 3 2 times. So that's our answer, 6, using the number line. Okay, the reason why we're using this person and jumping on the number line is because next we're going to talk about negative integers. So even though you know 3 times 2 is equal to 6, this number line is going to help you visualize what it looks like now when we have negative integers. So let's take a look at that example. Let's take a look at 3 times negative 2. So like we said, this is repeated addition. So we're going to jump 3 2 times now. Okay? Now the difference here is we see this negative sign. So remember how the person was facing towards the positives because it was a positive 3 times a positive 2? Well, now this person is going to be facing the negative side because we are going to jump 3 2 times, but it's negative, so they're going to be facing the negative side. So now my person's hat is going to be facing the other side. They have a big head and a little body. Okay, and they're going to jump 3 spaces twice. So here's one jump and here's another jump. Okay, so they jumped 3 twice, but to the left-hand side now, because that's what the negative sign is telling us. Okay, is telling us that direction that the person is heading towards. So I'm just going to draw their hat a little clearer so that you can see that they're facing this side. Okay, so then our final answer is negative 6. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 because they are jumping 3 times, but since that negative is there, it's telling us that this person is turned around, facing the negatives, and hopping over there twice, 3 spaces. Now our next example has negative 3 times negative 2. So this is going to be a little trickier, okay? But we're still going to start off at 0, our person with the big head and the small body, okay? So it's a negative 3 times negative 2, right? So that negative 2 tells us we're going to be facing the negatives. Okay, so this person's hat is facing the negatives, but it's a negative 3. So it's not going to be the same as before where we're jumping 3 spaces to the left. Now this person, since it's a negative 3, is going to be jumping backwards. Okay? they're going to be jumping backwards because that first negative tells us we're facing the negatives, and the second negative tells us, oh, well, we also got to flip the way you're jumping. So instead of jumping forwards, you're jumping backwards. So now we got to take a look at what it looks like when they're facing the negatives, first negative sign, and now jumping backwards. Again, jumping 3 spots twice. So here we go. 1 and 2. So we land at a positive 6. I know it's a lot to keep straight in your head, right? So if you notice, -3 times -2 is equal to 6, just like how positive 3 times positive 2 is also equal to 6. Okay, so there's a little pattern that I want you to think about now. Be sure that you draw this in your notes so that you can tell the difference of when we're just multiplying with one negative number versus both negative numbers and how it ends up being a positive answer. But also think to yourself, what's the pattern here? How can we remember this without drawing it every single time? Okay, so that's how we came up with this rule, the integer multiplication rules. You've probably heard of this before, but the positive number times a negative number equals a negative number because at the end you end up jumping into the negatives. Similarly, if we just switch the signs, a negative number times a positive number will also give you a negative number because that person is now facing the negatives and jumping. And then the negative times the negative, we said, gave us a positive. Because instead of facing the negatives and jumping forwards, they're facing the negatives and jumping backwards, which still lands them in the positive area. And of course, positive times positive equals positive. Okay, so we can add that as well. You guys already know that, but we can add that as well. And then these rules actually also apply to dividing integers, okay? Because as we know, multiplication and division are related to each other, okay? So these rules also work for dividing integers. I've seen people draw a little diagram on the side to kind of help them remember instead of memorizing. And they basically just draw this. So it's a triangle with a T, and they have the positive, negative, negative. So then they can go in any direction and say, okay, negative times negative is positive. Positive times negative is negative. Negative times positive is negative, and so on. If they just go in a circle in here, then they can remember the rules there. So either way that you want to remember, just remember that with the negative times negative, this is the one that people usually struggle with. The negative times negative equals positive because it just kind of goes against how we normally jump on the number line, okay? But it's basically you're flipping it twice. All right, and if that wasn't enough, here's another way that some people like to remember the integer multiplication and division rules. So you know how positive times negative equals a negative, right? So some people like to think about positive as being your friend and negative as being your enemy. So they'll say positive times negative equals a negative because a friend of my enemy is actually my enemy because I don't like whoever my enemy likes. They think negative times positive is equal to negative because the enemy is my negative of my friend, positive, is also my enemy because how dare you not get along with my friend? I also don't get along with you. And then for negative times negative equals positive, they think about it as the enemy of my enemy. Now, I don't usually use this rule because I find it very negative, haha. But according to this little trick, negative times negative would equal positive because the enemy of my enemy is actually my friend because you are also going against my enemy. So I kind of like you. And then, of course, positive times positive is equal to positive, because if you're a friend of my friend, then I also consider you my friend. So you can think about it like that, where positives represent friends and negatives represent enemies. All right, let's do some practice. So we have examples 11 and 12 from your book here. Go ahead and pause the video and try examples 11 and 12, A through C. For example 11, the multiplication problems, and then A and B for example 12, the division problems. All right, so you should have tried them on your own. I'm going to go ahead and draw that little symbol on the side to remind me. Okay, that positive times negative is negative, negative times positive is negative, negative times negative is positive. All right, so let's go ahead and do this then. 6 times 9 is normally a positive 54. I have a negative times a positive. Negative times positive is negative. So my answer is negative 54. So this is because I don't want to do the jumping on the number line. I could do it, but oof, 6 times 9, negative 6 times 9, that's a lot of jumping to get to negative 54. So it's easier for me just to remember the pattern. 4 times 4 normally is 16. These are two negatives. Negative times negative is positive. Remember, it's just like my person with the big head facing my negatives, but jumping backwards and therefore ending up in the positives. So that answer is positive 16. All right, and next up I have 8 times negative 4 times negative 7. Okay, so I'm going to use my calculator. 8 times 4 is 32. I'm going to take that answer and multiply it by 7, and it's 224. That's if they were all positive. Now I have a positive times a negative. Okay, positive times negative is negative. Okay, so now I have a negative, and then that negative answer is going to multiply by a negative answer. So negative times negative is positive. So it ends up being positive as well. So you should have gotten negative 54, 16, and 224 for those three problems. Let's take a look at example 12 with the division. Okay. For the first problem, I have negative 42 divided by negative 7. Normally, 42 divided by 7 is 6. But now there are two negatives. Negative times negative, or negative divided by negative, is positive. So this would just be like facing my negatives, but jumping backwards, so I end up in the positives. So that's a positive 6. Next up, negative 36 divided by 3. Normally, this would be 12 if they were both positive. But now we have a negative divided by a positive. Negative divided by a positive is negative. So it should be negative 12. It would be like if I'm facing my negatives and I'm jumping forwards, so I'm getting deeper and deeper to the left-hand side, which is negatives. So these two answers are 6 and negative 12.